Today we'll focus on 3 areas. First, Mike will speak to PCI requirements and the difficulties they impose on the Oracle Business Suite. Next, Mike will follow up about issues you should consider when credit card data resides in your EBS. Dave will then speak about the alternative solution of keeping credit card data out of your EBS and therefore keeping your EBS out of the PCI compliance requirements and issues. I'll now turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Phil. So with regard to PCI DSS, I'll keep this short as looking at the attendees on the line here today. Most people are familiar with PCI, but that said, PCI DSS is the industry-led standard for providing security in and around processing and storage of credit cards. So the PCI Council has put forth the Data Security Standard, DSS, which really consists of 225 questions with regard to the full ecosystem in which your credit card processing is occurring. So from the network edge all the way into the database, and the 225 questions are all interrelated. The primary requirement for DSS is in and around the protection of the primary account number, known as the PAN. At a very high level, there's 4 easy options to protect that. 1, truncation, e.g. removing the credit card number from the system, potentially after the transaction has occurred, or let's say in the case of test and development. We'll get to test and development a little deeper into the presentation here today. Outside of truncation, there's encryption, hashing, and then finally tokenization. The bottom line is that whether or not you have 1 credit card stored in your EBS environment or you have tens of thousands of credit cards being processed, the PCI DSS standard applies equally. When you break down the PCI DSS, there are 12 main categories. So if you read down on the left there, use of a firewall, defaults, and we've simplified the PCI DSS requirements here into the high-level requirements here on the left there. So, and then what we've done here on the right on this slide here is we've broken out by the layer of technology, by the network, by the service, by the server, and then more particularly here, the difference between the database and the application, in this case, the Oracle eBusiness Suite. And you can see how from the check marks here that though there are some areas that you can check off at the network level, there are many that on the other extreme that you can only look at as far as adhering to the policy. When you think about it as far as ease of compliance effort, some things are harder to do than others. And so what we're really looking at here, when you get down to it, as far as if you have, again, whether or not it's a handful of credit cards or you're processing tens of thousands of cards, the requirement is the same. There's 225 questions that are spread across these 12 disciplines, need to be all answered in the affirmative. Most particularly here, if you look down at the bottom, is Section 10 in and around monitoring and access. PCI DSS requires you to be able to capture who entered the system, what they did, and that you be able to reconstruct that for many months afterwards, after that transaction occurred. So you can see there, as far as meeting the PCI DSS requirements for Section 10 is highly difficult. So we're rating this on a scale of 1 to 10. You can see we've left that as a 6. Other areas, for example, as far as use of antivirus software, that doesn't apply to the Oracle database or to the Oracle EBS, so that is blank. We'll be sending out a copy of this deck, as Phil said, afterwards, so you have the benefit of this if you're thinking about taking notes here today. Some things to keep in mind with regard to the Oracle eBusiness Suite, though. The Oracle eBusiness Suite, out of the box, after you've done the initial install, is not PCI DSS compliant. With Release 12, of which most of you, if you're running the Oracle eBusiness Suite here today, most likely you are on probably Release 12.1.3 at least. This PCI DSS functionality has been rebuilt, actually in a much better way. We'll get into that here in a moment. And the other third point here to make is that once you do go through and follow the optional steps to enable the PCI DSS functionality within the Oracle eBusiness Suite, that's really day one, and the other 364 days a year. There is ongoing maintenance and ongoing steps you need to take in order to maintain your PCI DSS compliance. So let's talk a little bit more about these requirements here as far as they're ongoing. When you have, again, whether or not you have a handful of cards in the database or whether or not you have tens of thousands of cards, the requirement, all those 225 questions need to be answered in the affirmative. Some of those, for example, have to do with the application of patches. So PCI DSS wants you to apply patches within 30 days of release. And if you think about the cadence of the Oracle quarterly patch update process, in that many organizations choose to remain N-1. Let's say you're going to be applying the quarterly patch, this quarter for last quarter, in that you're going to let the market potentially stabilize any of the features and functionality that Oracle has attempted to stabilize or fix. That can be a challenge to maintain for some organizations, just patching quarterly, regardless of what cadence you're on. Generic accounts, if you think about how the Oracle eBusiness Suite is built and how people commonly use the Oracle eBusiness Suite, the use of generic accounts are required. Out of the box, some of the accounts are generic, so there needs to be some counter measures and mitigations put in place. But even just simple things such as strict password complexity or sweeping every 90 days for stale and inactive users, these are business policies and processes that need to be in place. We talked a little bit about Section 10 being able to monitor and track, and think about that this monitoring and tracking is not just at the operating system, it's not just at the firewall, it is also the requirement within the Oracle eBusiness Suite itself, within the various levels of logging and auditing that are available within the suite. And last but not least, the concept of annual penetration tests. So the bottom line on this slide here is that though you might go through the steps to encrypt cardholder data within the Oracle eBusiness Suite, there's a lot of other requirements that you need to be thinking about meeting on a day-over-day, week-over-week, month-over-month basis in order to maintain that PCI DSS compliance. So, as noted, most of you are probably on Release 12 of the Oracle eBusiness Suite. With that, what Oracle has done is consolidated all of the different places within the prior releases that credit cards were processed and stored into one place. So that has been that single place with Release 12 is the Oracle Secure Payments Repository, which allows credit cards to be stored once. Here's a high-level table schematic of what that is, that single area. If you look in the upper left-hand corner there, the table actually is IBY credit card. And all of the subsystems now refer back to that. It's a three-step process to enable that encryption. You first create a wallet. You then go into the secure payments setup screens within the application itself. You register the location of the wallet and the password to open the wallet, and then you encrypt any cards that you crypt any PANs, credit cards that have already been processed, as well as hopefully you take the option to immediately encrypt cardholder data as transactions are created. One of the things to keep in mind, and this is in one of our white papers that is up on our website, is that Oracle gives you the ability to encrypt the cards in real time or in batch mode. We always recommend to encrypt it in real time. Some other things to keep in mind with regard to the Oracle eBusiness Suite and credit cards is that PCI DSS has some very strict and very we'll say, straightforward and clear requirements with regard to test and development. Requirement 643 is very clear that no production or live cardholder data is allowed in test and development. So what this means is that when you create, which is many people have a weekly, if not a daily process to create production support instances of for their Oracle eBusiness Suite, in that you need to think about what cloning and scrambling processes you need to do to either scramble those or remove, truncate production cardholder data. Something else to think about is the section 3.5 or requirement 3.5, which says that you can't recycle your production encryption keys in your non-production instances. To make a long story short, that Oracle wallet that I referred to on the screen before, you can't have the same wallet, the same password, so to speak, in both production and your non-productions. Some other things to keep in mind, section 3.1 is that Oracle, that PCI DSS Requirement 3.1 says that there should be a quarterly process to make sure that cardholder data is purged. For example, if there's any need for a return of the item or whatever the transaction is, PCI DSS doesn't want you to maintain that in perpetuity. This creates some difficulties in that the Oracle eBusiness Suite does not provide a single solution for this. There are multiple enhancement requests if you look into Oracle support, and Oracle is now following this on a module by module basis, in that the student system is looking at this differently as far as the purge process than, let's say, iStore. For you as an Oracle eBusiness Suite customer, what this means is that other than working Oracle support asking for enhancements, this leaves you with some responsibilities to purge or authenticate data on an ongoing basis through your own customizations. Some other things to think about, though, again, PCI DSS, this 225 questions, applies to the entire ecosystem. And something that we commonly find in our engagements and conversations with clients is that the PCI cardholder data exists in many places other than just the seeded tables, other than just in that one IBY credit card table. There are customizations. Sometimes DBAs will make copies of tables prior to upgrades, and we will find tables with the name of like IBI credit card _ backup. You also have to think about interface files, log files, etc., because the cardholder data needs to be protected regardless of where it's found. So, for example, when we do a regular expression crawl, looking through the database for where credit cards are found, we have found credit cards certainly in not just the IBY schemas, but as order entry, etc. So in summary here, what we're looking at is that for PCI DSS, 225 questions over 12 different disciplines, and it's looking at the entire ecosystem. And when the Oracle eBusiness Suite is in that, you need to think about meeting all of those 225 requirements. And if you are running a wide footprint, not just, let's say, Oracle Financials, but potentially the manufacturing operations and HR payroll, working through maintenance cycles to potentially bring down the EBS, to apply patches, for example, to meet PCI, can be difficult if you're needing to shut down your production line. As well, the requirements in and around monitoring, and that 24/7 being able to capture keystrokes and being able to reconstruct those keystrokes, mostly for privileged users that are coming in, for example, DBAs. Just setting up that can be costly costly in sometimes not so easy to design even in the first place. So with that, if you remember one of the first slides, we talked about how does PCI want you, or how does it require you to protect the cardholder data? Well, one, it says truncation. You can remove cardholder data. So, for example, you could remove cardholder data from your test and development instances. For production instances, you can do encryption. And if you think about encryption as a two-way exercise, you can both encrypt and decrypt as needed, or there is the option for tokenization. And really what we're doing here is we're sidestepping the Oracle e-business suite, and we are still using the Oracle e-business suite to process the transaction, but we're going to store the credit card primary account number that PCI requires us to protect. We're going to store that someplace else. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to David.
Mike, if you could stay the presenter and just give me the keyboard and mouse.
Yeah. And with that, David, take it away.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Mike. Great summary, great information, and we've done this seminar a couple times, and every time you show the slide that shows where the sensitive data is stored in EBS, it reminds me of several years ago when I started down the PCI journey myself. The first site that I fortunately stumbled upon was the Integragy site. If you know, for the listeners, if you have not visited their site, if you have not seen or investigated the tools and the services that they provide, please do so. They've been valuable to us at CardConnect, and we have recommended them to some of our customers as well. And I wanted to share a personal sharing about where you say the credit card numbers show up in some of the strangest places. We actually worked with a customer recently that used to store the last used credit card number in one of the DFFs on one of the base objects in EBS. So you're right, it's not always in the bank accounts column or the credit card number column. You can find them just about anywhere. So. All right. One of the things that Mike touched upon earlier in the presentation was the idea of how to secure the data, and there are 4 options: truncation, tokenization, encryption, etc. I'm going to narrow the focus down to encryption versus tokenization. In particular, each has their strength, each has their weaknesses. Tokenization, though, provides what we believe is an added benefit of if the data is not in there, there's no way that anyone can hack in and get it. And if you tokenize, you should do so at the earliest possible point in your business process for any of the channels through which you accept credit card numbers. So encryption is prepackaged with Oracle EBS. It is not turned on by default. Mike mentioned that earlier. But if you do, it does help you achieve some of the deliverables for PCI. The disadvantage is that the key, the master key that is used to decrypt the data, the actual encryption keys, and the sensitive data are all stored on your middle tier and in your database. So if someone gets the app's password, if somebody gets unwarranted access to your system, there is the chance that they could be able to restore the credit card, the encrypted values, back to the original credit card number. So not a pleasant thought, but as long as the data is there, there's always the chance that something like that could happen. And we've worked with companies that have encrypted their data and want to switch on tokenization, and they've engaged our services, and we were able to restore the non-encrypted values without having the master key from the system. So, and I'm not that smart, as some of the salespeople on the call right now would probably second. If I can figure it out, it can't be too difficult. So, the advantage of tokenization is that the data is not in your EBS. It's not in the DFF where the last credit card number is stored. It's not in any of the sensitive tables that Mike had outlined earlier. So when you talk about when you're considering vendors for tokenization and for those vendors that help with reducing the cost and effort associated with your PCI program, you should consider those that make use of tokenization. All right. Tokenization is a general approach for replacing sensitive data in your EBS system. It can be used in EBS. It can be used in some of your ancillary services or servers. If you have a shopping cart, iStore, e-commerce environment, and it communicates with EBS, you could also use tokenization there, as long as at the point where the authorization, funds capture, etc. occur, flows through a gateway that is bolted into or can communicate in real time with the tokenization provider. One important point is most people think about when you engage the services and do your tokenization, you identify the vectors, every channel through which card numbers can be introduced to your system. You must also consider your historical card data. A personal experience, we work with customers that have a few thousand cards all the way up to tens of millions of cards. I think the most we've done in a data conversion is about 22 million. You want to take that into consideration. Should you have a phased approach to historical tokenization? What happens on cutover weekend? How much of the old data can you tokenize up front? And then maybe do a delta as you're getting closer and closer to go live weekend. And of course, you want to implement tokenization for all your historical data, as well as those all new transactions, all new credit card information that is introduced through your system. Okay. Again, you have to identify those channels that you currently accept credit card numbers through. So when I think of Oracle EBS, I think of Oracle Forms. So that's a typical call center environment where a call center representative takes a phone call, takes a credit card number over the phone, and then keys that credit card number into Oracle eBusiness. You need tokenization there. In an iStore or any e-commerce environment, you need tokenization to be embedded in the shopping cart so that the card number is tokenized as it's presented to the web page, not as the web page is posted back to your server. The typical approach there is to do it with an AJAX call that calls a remote web service that then renders a token back to the shopping cart, masks it in a way that it doesn't look too scary to the user. Maybe you tuck the token into a hidden field and you change the credit card number field to a masked value, and then the hidden token in the credit card number field is what gets processed forward. Mobile applications, if you have phone-enabled applications or tablet-enabled e-commerce environment, I think iStore e-commerce basically speak to the same thing. And then point of sale, and I don't have a slide specifically on P2PE, but I encourage all of you to do a little bit of research on P2PE or point-to-point encryption. Only a few vendors offer options for P2PE, and in essence, P2PE, I'll give you a simple example, is a calculator or keyboard type device that encrypts the data, the credit card or the track data on the device, which means by the time the workstation or Oracle EBS sees it, it's going to be encrypted already. So if you're thinking about the Home Depot and the Target hacks, which were memory scraping type vectors, this completely circumvents that, because by the time it hits the workstation memory, it is already an encrypted value and cannot be seen as clear text. Most memory scrapers would not even identify the encrypted value as a potential card value. That value then is then sent to a web service, which then decrypts it with a single-use key. It is tokenized at that point, encrypted and stored in a vault, and the token is returned to the calling program. One quick word about tokenization. Actually, I think I have a slide for single to multi-use, so I'll address that a little bit later. So if you're writing down any notes, just jot down P2PE. In addition, if you introduce a P2PE compliant device into your base business processes, then you can it depends on your situation, what level merchant you are, how many transactions you do, etc., and the level to which you've introduced it, but you can reduce your compliance effort down to a P2PE SAQ, the self-assessment questionnaire. Okay. Tokenization. Tokens come in a couple different flavors. I've heard them called vaultless tokens, reversible, which I consider reversible tokens, irreversible tokens, and single versus multi-use tokens. Irreversible tokens provide what I think is the greatest compliance benefit. They in no way represent any of the original or any indication of the original card value. Now, it is important to say that some tokens can be intelligent. That is, and we've seen this in a couple different situations where and it's also the case with the CardConnect token, is that the last 4 digits of our token are maintained from the last 4 digits of the original credit card number. And that's important because when you're masking in Oracle eBusiness, specifically the last 4 digits are shown. It makes it very convenient. In addition, it would be nice if the token could indicate what brand of card was originally presented, because then when you're dealing with Mr. or Mrs. Smith, you can pull up a record and say, oh, your Visa that ends in 1111, yes, that's the one I want to use. However, wherever possible, all other values or the remainder of the token should not be a value that is derived from the original, because there are smart people out there and some devious people that will take 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 of your tokens and try to discern a pattern to get back to the original value. The second bullet item here is single use versus multi-use. Single use provides, I think, a more disconnected and maybe an advantage with regard to security, because it's a kind of a use it and throw it away. But if you're a merchant that's very similar to the ones that we deal with on a regular basis, you deal with recurring invoices, you deal with subscription-based orders, and you want the same card represented by the same token to be able to be used over and over again. So multi-use, single use and multi-use, this might be something that you argue about over lunch. Single use has its advantages. Multi-use is what we see being used most often. Okay. I hope I didn't skip a slide there. The next consideration is how is the service, the web service, the vaulting service, the tokenization service, or the encryption service rendered? Is it something that's available remotely, or is it something that you have to do internally? Like you don't do it in EBS, but you have another repository running locally, kind of a premise install. It saves your EBS from being within scope for PCI, but it still doesn't remove your organization in total. The advantage there, or the recommendation there, is to take something that is hosted external to your environment. Different companies have different tolerance for risk. We understand that. Some service providers will do hosted and some will do premise. I participated in several of each. I have found the remote hosted engagements to be far more successful, and I don't want to speak ill necessarily of any of our customers, but it is the general understanding or belief that, well, the server that sits there and runs our encryption isn't really our server, it's the vendor's server, we just let it sit there. Well, no, you still have to do backups. You still have to make sure that the OS and the databases are patched, regardless of what OS or database they use to host their service. I guess I don't know exactly how to make an analogy for this, but there are companies that provide hosting and tokenization and security services. They're experts. They know what they do. They're on top of it on a 24-hour basis. Let them do what they are good at doing. Right? So find something where the service is hosted. In addition, you also want to be very interested in the security compliance program at your vendor. Ask for the attestation on compliance. Ask for any SAQs that they do. Ask for the result of recent audits. Within reason, they will provide you with some information. Audits obviously can expose vulnerabilities, and they won't share all of it, but ask for the standard compliance documentation for any provider that you decide to work with. Okay. This is, I apologize to the Integrity gang, this is a bit of a sales slide. So at CardConnect we specialize in a couple add-on solutions that are, they're payment related, but they're not necessarily security related or encryption or tokenization related. We can follow up with additional information about what these offerings are, but as a general suggestion, you might want to evaluate your vendors for their security and compliance aspects, as well as their payment processing knowledge in general. So one of the solutions that's available through CardConnect is our reconciliation, or we call it card deposit. It helps once your remittance batch is sent to the processor, your AR has open receipts that are sitting at a remitted status. The card deposit reconciliation that we offer will bring back funding data from the processor match it to the open receipts in AR, and close them. And it does it all with no modifications to Oracle EBS. It uses the standard interface tables, and it uses auto import and reconciliation. We think it's a huge time saver, and the customers that have taken advantage of it manage by exception only, so that 90–95% of their receipts are closed, and now they're just troubleshooting the ones that are truly a challenge. So. Okay, so for all the looking in at your pool of vendors, you're going to select one you're going to do business with them. Let's just consider some of the costs and cost reductions related to your PCI compliance program. So the chart I have here, I have the reference in there. This changes on a quarterly or at least annual basis, so feel free to do your own investigation. For a level 1 merchant, which is the larger ones that we have dealt with, and we have customers that run upwards of 1 million transactions a month, your initial budget for determining what your compliance program is or should be, and then is about $250,000. Then the effort required to patch up your EBS and engage vendors and do other things. This is without the use of a vendor like CardConnect or Integrity. By no means do I mean that our solutions cost upwards of $1 million, but this is tangible cost as well as intangible cost to become compliant. Again, depending upon the level that you are, you see the cost reflected in the middle column, and then the annual cost for maintaining compliance. I think the level 3, level 4 number at $35,000 is a very conservative number. We have dealt with customers that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars just for their audit. And remember, the annual cost is not just for audits and patches and upgrades. It's for those intangible costs like how many people are maintaining your compliance program, et cetera. So. The costs for becoming compliant are significant. The costs for getting caught not being compliant are even more significant. So we've heard about the fees and the penalties that were assessed to some of the recent vendors that have been breached. Pardon me for 1 second. The cost for being non-compliant can be astronomical, and there's a tangible, real cost associated with a breach, and there is an intangible cost associated with the damage that it does to your reputation. So by all means, take your PCI compliance program very seriously. Make every effort, do your homework, do your research, find out which vendor, which program, which solution is right for you, and then plan your compliance. Make your plan to get to your compliance goal and execute accordingly. Okay, just one example, and this was it's a paraphrase of a customer that we had worked with in the last year or so. They were required to fill out a SAC-D. Their annual costs for just the QSA to come in was $100,000 plus for every year, and they had the equivalent of 2 full-time employees dedicated. That was a compliance manager, a systems engineer, and a DBA. So factoring in, a third of each of their time, or a little bit more of one and the other, it was essentially the equivalent of 2 employees. After a tokenization and P2PE solution was introduced, they were able to reduce their effort down to a SAC-B. Their annual audit requirements now only cost them about $3,000 a year, and they're down to 1 full-time equivalent because it's less than 1/3 of a job for the 3 people that were originally involved in the process. So the summary there is that it's greatly reduced. So this page kind of summarizes what the typical scenario is before implementing tokenization and what it is afterwards. I will admit that this is a little focused on the CardConnect solution because it does include the reconciliation components. I'm just going to leave this here. If you download and you review, please review at your leisure, and you can contact any of the Integrity team or the CardConnect team for further information. So I think we talked about what tokenization can do for you, how to evaluate, what to assess, what your criteria should be, the cost associated with a program that is compliant and could potentially, if there were a breach, et cetera. I guess we'll hand back off to Phil.
Thank you, Dave. I think we're, again, if I summarize what we've just been going through for the last 45 minutes, that Mike started off the session speaking about the Oracle Business Suite does not meet the requirements set by PCI. He mapped out the 12 PCI requirements and showed where Oracle EBS and database fall short. He then followed up with some of the issues you might consider if you're using or plan to use credit card data in your EBS, including the finding and purging of existing credit card data and other sensitive data. Dave then continued by speaking about taking the EBS, Oracle EBS, out of the PCI compliance picture through the use of tokenization and encryption. And he spoke about how tokenization works and some of the cost benefits you might expect. Both Mike and Dave's contact information will be displayed now, actually. Thank you. So let's get to some of the questions we have. We have a couple of them here. All right. The first question is, how long is a typical integration process for tokenization?
I can take that one. So the length of the integration project is directly related to the options that you select, to the level of your EBS, in particular if you're 11i, R12 or 12.1 or 12.2, and what we find, it'll probably take several weeks to several months to get through the basic project. That is, setting up your test environment, setting up your QA, and your production, and then doing an adequate level of testing in all three phases. The challenge really comes in, and I mentioned this in my part of the presentation, is if you have a few thousand credit card numbers, I joke a lot of times and say, we'll just tokenize those by hand. If you have a few million, or if you have tens of millions, we have a utility that can go in and help with that. But it's always good. The data conversion on Go Live Weekend is probably the most critical step outside of establishing the connection between the two. In general, our implementations last between 60 and 90 days.
Thank you. Corporate credit cards, do they need to be PCI compliant?
I can speak to that. So if you read in the cardholder agreement, be it with Visa or MasterCard, there should be some fine print there that, if anything, recommends that the corporate cards be appropriately protected. But in that these cards belong to you, not your customers, PCI usually is not required as far as the PCI DSS requirements. So the short answer is most often it is not. Rarely have we seen that, but each of you should look at the fine print in your cardholder agreement to confirm that.
Thank you, Mike. Next question, can tokenization cause any performance problems with the Oracle EBS?
In my experience, no. It's just another 16-digit number. It's handled exactly the same way. The actual tokenization call is handled, at least with the CardConnect solution, is handled outside of the standard processing with EBS. That's the whole idea. It only handles the credit card number. It's a 16-digit number that passes LUN check and matches the ranges in EBS. It's all exactly the same.
Thank you. Next one. Does Oracle credit card encryption cause any performance problems?
In Integrity's experience, no. And again, the cost-benefit analysis is that if you're not going to tokenize, you need to be encrypting, so you need to encrypt it regardless.
Okay. Next question. What types of payment acceptance hardware/software can be used with tokenization?
So I can only speak with the models that we support here at CardConnect. So this is going to be somewhat a CardConnect-centric response. So in particular, the Ingenico and IDTech modules, probably 3 or 4 for each of the brands of the most popular ones. We have found a way to support them with absolutely no software on the desktop. Depending upon the model. For larger models that are using swipe and signature capture, you can, I believe you have to install drivers at least for the USB drivers on the PC, but we are working towards a solution that has no footprint on the PC, the individual workstation, that all components necessary to interact with the hardware would be delivered via the web. And if you want model numbers, you can check out the Ingenico IPP320 and ISC250, as well as the IDTech SRED key device.
Wow. Thank you, Dave.
Maybe they'll get that when they get the recording.
I think we have one last question here, and that is, do you have any cheat sheets on validating e-business suite within compliance of PCI DSS 3.0, specifically technical? Wow.
Well, maybe, David, we could both speak to that, but from Integrity, if you look up on our website, we do have a number of white papers on the topic, and particularly there is a white paper that I think is featured in the resources section of our integrity.com website that addresses PCI DSS compliance with within the Oracle eBusiness Suite. And some of the slides from the presentation here you will find in that presentation, but we do go into the requirements in much more detail.
And I can add something, but it'll be fairly minor, is, I think I said this before, go to the Integrity website. The resources they have there, and I'll make a pitch if you guys won't, for the App Sentry and App Defend products. The Integrity team has a tool that can actually go through and find sensitive data in your EBS, which I think is great. It's kind of like an X-ray when you go to the doctors.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. So I think this is the last of our questions. Go ahead.
Phil, I see one question just came in. I'll read it here. Does your EBS have to be on a separate network? I'm interpreting that, David, as far as if the tokenization solution is present, does the EBS need to be on a separate network?
Okay, so in one of my slides, I think I talked about the advantage and disadvantages of having a premise install versus a hosted install. If you're using a hosted install, then your network is your own, and all cardholder data, all sensitive data, the card number and other sensitive card data is being outsourced to a provider. In that case, then your EBS inherently would be on a separate network. If you decide to run with a vendor that has a premise installation, so you're saving the effort associated with EBS compliance, but you're still keeping sensitive card data locally, which is a viable option for some companies, then yes, you still have to follow all the rules and regulations for PCI. You should segregate, and if you're using tokenization, you should segregate cardholder data from using firewalls and network appliances as necessary in compliance with PCI, so that your EBS and tokenization resides in one place, cardholder data resides in another, and only those person, services, etc., have access to that require it for their business.
All right. Thanks for catching that, Mike. All right, this is going to conclude our session for the day. Again, I appreciate everybody taking time out of the middle of the day to come hear about integrity and PCI compliance and EBS. Don't forget that next month on June 25th, we have another presentation, another webinar. It's based on cyber attacks against the Oracle database. So be sure to tune in at the same 2 o'clock time. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.